Girl Interrupted premiered 25 years ago and provided us with a totally new kind of exploration of young women's struggle with mental health in a world that is very intent on trying to constrain them, and the importance of the bonds they build with each other on their journey.
Was I ever crazy? Maybe. Or maybe life is.
Starring some of the biggest names of the era, like Winona Ryder, Angelina Jolie, Brittany Murphy, Whoopi Goldberg, plus a young Elizabeth Moss before she hit it big with Mad Men, the movie has become a beloved classic, especially because its story, in being of so many eras, manages to feel timeless. Girl Interrupted continues to resonate with audiences even a quarter of a century later. But what is it specifically that makes the film so impactful?
Crazy isn't being broken. It's you or me. Amplified.
Girl Interrupted is set in the late 1960s and follows the story of Susanna, an 18-year-old who finds herself checked into a psychiatric institution against her will after she intentionally overdosed in the midst of a nervous breakdown. The story is based on the real-life Susanna Kaysen, who wrote the memoir which the film is adapted from. The story is very of its era. Many of the struggles the young women face stem from the way women, especially young women, were subjugated in the 1950s and 60s as the fight for equality began to shake things up and scare the status quo. But it also felt incredibly relevant to the time of its release as well. In 1999, women were reckoning with new issues surrounding personal freedom and their place in the world.
You try to fit in, but you can't. Hurt yourself on the outside to try to kill the thing on the inside.
The 1960s were, in a way, similar to the turn of the century, in that both eras felt like moments of immense change in society, in the power structure, and in which society attempted to contain people who did not fit in, or were seen as a threat to the existing order. In each young woman in the ward, we can see how being an outsider of any kind can erase much of your identity to others, their individual personhood sanded away in favor of seeing them each as just part of a problem, or as solely a function of their mental illness. The stories that have come to define these girls are all essentially based around the most traumatic parts of their lives, or their mental illnesses as a whole. And we find many of these stories aren't even true. For example, everyone believes that Polly purposefully lit herself on fire during a breakdown, but it's later revealed that she was a victim of a house fire. But, as is often the case, the truth doesn't necessarily dictate what people choose to believe about each other, especially when it comes to people suffering from mental illness. Each young woman's struggle in a way represents an extreme version of things that so many young women have to contend with, and are judged harshly for. Swings in emotion, people thinking they lie about everything, self-harm, disordered eating, disobeying authority.
Social contrariness and a generally pessimistic attitude are often observed.
Oh, that's me. That's everybody.
In the 60s, the 90s, and even today, women pushing for more, equality, fair treatment for their voices to be heard, or just being openly unhappy with the way they're treated by the world, has been framed by some as a sign that they are in some way defective, and as something that should be punished.
I don't want to end up like my mother. Women today have more choices than that. No, they don't.
And in these girls' stories, we can see how they're functionally presented with the same two narrow options we often feel trapped between in real life, either figuring out how to be, or at least pretend to be, quote-unquote normal, or ending up ostracized forever.
Have you ever confused a dream with life?
Their freedom isn't necessarily based on actually getting better, but instead on just being able to feign the correct mindset, as we see with Daisy, who is released, even though none of her actual problems have been dealt with in any way that helps her, to disastrous results. The film has often been compared to 1975's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is also set in the 1960s and focuses on the issues of psychiatry and institutionalization, with a particular interest in laying bare how nebulous the line between crazy and non-crazy people truly is, and how the distinction is so often dependent on who is in charge of making the decision.
Think you are, for Christ's sake, crazy or something? You're not. You're no crazier than the average all out walking around on the streets, and that's it.
While Girl Interrupted is focused on women, Cuckoo's Nest is from a very male point of view. The only main female character is the major antagonist, And while Jack Nicholson's Randall Murphy was incarcerated for harming a teen girl, in Girl Interrupted, we get to see the stories through the eyes of a teen girl herself. As a result of all of these differences, though they may share rather similar basic concepts, both end up with very different tones, points of views, and messages. Whereas Cuckoo's Nest ends with Murphy totally losing control of himself and his mind after he's lobotomized, Girl Interrupted is about Susanna successfully regaining her control. McMurphy's story is more analogous to Lisa's, unable to escape the cycle. But Girl Interrupted does give Lisa her humanity, and at least the hope of regaining some control over her personhood. The young women at Claymore Psychiatric Hospital have found that, because of the way they behave, look, and experience the world, that they don't feel like they fit into society at large. And others around them see having them locked away because of their mental health issues as a way to essentially permanently banish them from the everyday world.
You know, I know all about you, and I hope they put you away forever.
But here in this community, their outsider status isn't weird at all. In fact, everyone has something going on that makes them stand out, and often a pariah. Though they have very different problems and experiences, being together in this place does give them a shared sense of belonging and understanding, allowing them to form a tight, if sometimes tenuous, bond.
They were not perfect, but they were my friends.
They certainly fight with one another, and even use each other's problems as weapons. But we also see how their shared sense of identity in being crazy has allowed them to find a place where they feel like they can belong. Though, as we see, this can have its own drawbacks, which we'll discuss in a moment. But in a world where they have constantly been told that they're not normal or something is wrong with them, they can find comfort here in this place where that, in fact, is the norm. It also allows them to be there for each other in a way no one else, not even the doctors and nurses, can truly be. Susanna even turns down running away with her boyfriend, who's trying to avoid getting drafted into Vietnam, because she doesn't want to leave the others, in this place where she finally doesn't feel like the only crazy person in the room behind.
Them? They're eating grapes off of the wallpaper. They're insane.
If they are, I am.
While their various mental health issues have hindered each girl's ability to control her own life to varying degrees, they've all also literally had their control taken away as they've been incarcerated in this psychiatric facility against their will. They've had to learn how to cope and survive in this new environment, living according to the rules of the nurses and doctors there, and not being allowed to make choices for themselves. They struggle with the fact that their ability to regain their freedom is seemingly based far more on their being willing to fit themselves into the accepted boxes and stereotypes for women of the time than anything else. And when they do step out of line, they're hit with intense, inhumane punishments like electroshock and isolation. Susanna felt listless and trapped in her life, and so attempted to end it because she couldn't figure out another way to cope during her breakdown, and felt like she didn't have any other options. But this led to her becoming trapped in the institution, where she feels like her options have been narrowed down yet again, and going in either direction feels nearly impossible.
Ambivalence suggests strong feelings. In opposition, you are torn between two opposing courses of action.
Lisa illustrates how this loss of control can lead to one attempting to wrest back control in increasingly destructive ways. She rebels against everything and everyone she encounters. It at first comes across as genuine bravado, but we quickly realize that there's much more going on under the surface. Her pushing back so often and so intensely is her attempt to stake out claim over her own personhood in contrast to the others around her and the institution at large. While Susanna has only just arrived, Lisa has been in the hospital for years, since she was only 12 years old. And so these are the kinds of coping mechanisms that she's had to come up with to survive both her life before and her time in the institution. She hits out at people that she sees as weaker than herself in an effort to prove to herself that she is strong and capable, so that she doesn't have to look inward and confront the truth about her own issues.
What the fuck are you doing, Lisa? I'm playing the villain, baby. Just like you want.
This is also likely a part of the cycle of abuse, with her doling out abuse very similar to what she likely suffered as a child. It can be easier to lash out at those closest to you when you feel like you can't actually hit back at the people or things that are really causing your pain. And Lisa continually has to keep up this aggressive, overconfident front lest she have to truly confront the full extent of her issues and the long road she has to overcoming them and really taking control of her life. The film deals with the idea of escape on multiple levels: literal physical escape, escaping society, and escaping one's own mind. When they're taken out to get some ice cream, we see how this group of outsiders is treated by wider society, how they don't feel like they fit in this kind of world. And then the group makes a break for it and takes an unauthorized field trip to visit Daisy at her new apartment. Here we see how this isn't really an escape for any of them. While they're all technically out of the institution, they haven't left their problems behind. As Susanna eventually points out to Lisa, more than the hospital itself, she's trapped in a confine of her own making. Her abrasive, sometimes outright abusive behavior is a cover for her own fear and sadness that she doesn't want to deal with, a shell she's built up in the hopes that no one will notice how broken and alone she really feels.
That's why you keep coming back here. You're not free. You need this place. You need it to feel alive.
Their mistreatment by society has trapped them in what feels like an endless cycle. They're ostracized, they fight back in a way that's deemed unacceptable, they're confined allegedly for their own good, and the cycle repeats itself. But Susanna realizes that she doesn't want to be stuck on this wheel forever if she can help it. Though it's not easy, she begins to cooperate with her treatment and comes to find that it does help her reframe things and open herself up to new options in her life.
I've wasted a year of my life. Maybe the whole world is stupid, but I'd rather be in it.
Even Lisa seems to find a new level of self-understanding. She's by no means cured, but she has opened herself up to seeing herself as more than just the worst parts of her, and accepting that she is a full person underneath who deserves a chance.
I'm not really dead. I know.
Valerie continually points out how important it is to not let yourself get stuck in or pulled under by expectations or limitations others put on you. If you're going to have any hope of building a safe, happy life for yourself, you have to find a way to keep moving forward, as impossible as that can sometimes feel.
Do not drop anchor here. Understand?
While everything isn't fixed in the end and wrapped up in a nice bow, the ending does still feel hopeful because of that forward momentum.
And by the 70s, most of them were out, living lives. But there isn't a day my heart doesn't find them.
In the end, it's not about being cured and becoming not crazy, but instead learning to accept yourself for who you are and figure out ways to cope with this wild and sometimes painful world. Because as difficult as it can sometimes be to imagine, there is hope in the future. And it's important that we give ourselves the opportunity to get there.
Maybe I was just crazy. Maybe it was the 60s. Or maybe I was just a girl. Interrupted.
That's The Take. Click here to watch the video we think you'll love, or here to check out a whole playlist of awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.